Hello and welcome to Senploy Spotlight Sessions. I'm Amy Allen, I'm the founder and managing director of Senploy. The goal of the Spotlight Sessions is to shed some light on the incredible work being done in the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities sector, or SEND, and to generate some thought-provoking conversations and discussions around various aspects of the SEND sector. We'll be sharing successes, positive developments, and looking at some of the challenges in this expansive landscape. And we've selected individuals to join us in the sessions who are not only experts in their field, but they're trailblazers, advocators, and dedicated educators who, through their work, they're directly and indirectly positively affecting and impacting on the lives of children and young people. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce this session. So in today's session, I'm speaking with Simon Hepburn from Marketing Advice for Schools. He brings with him a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field of marketing and stakeholder engagement within the education sector. So our conversation today will explore a wide spectrum of topics that offer deep insights into the world of education and marketing. So Simon, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Can you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, of course, Amy. So for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been combining working with schools and actually as a teacher and more recently as a careers advisor with helping schools in all sectors with wider marketing issues around a range of stakeholders, whether that be recruiting more students or engaging parents and increasingly helping them with recruitment as the teacher recruitment crisis increases.
Okay, awesome. So what does education marketing and stakeholder engagement actually mean, and why is it important?
Sure. I mean, I think the thing is that schools don't exist in a vacuum. I think schools do fantastic things, but it's really, really important that they bring people with them, and we see that all the time with parents who need to be engaged with the values and the way the school is going. They need to increase income, and sometimes that's dealing with local businesses and people who use the facilities. Obviously recruitment, with each school being responsible for its own recruitment in both the state sector and the private sector. It's enormously important that schools are full and have the capacity, and there's a whole range of stakeholders that schools need to spend time on, and they don't often have the capacity sometimes inside themselves to do that.
Yeah, we're always hearing about budgets and funding around schools, aren't we? So I guess that's a key part of what you do, and you can have a massive impact on that. So what's your background, Simon? What's led you to be able to do this job as well as you do?
Sure. So I started off working in marketing after university, and I worked a lot in recruitment marketing.
Okay.
Worked for Reed for a few years, and that was a fantastic experience. I got to work with James Reed, who's now all over the place talking about that the recruitment market. He's an expert there, and I sat next to him in the head office for a while and learned from him. Then I worked for a reputation management consultancy, and part of my role there was to set up a practice working on HR issues and recruitment. Okay. And did some work with big employers like Vodafone on employer branding. And then I had a complete change of mind, and Tony Blair, if anyone is old enough to remember, made a big speech about education.
Yeah.
And I was persuaded to become a teacher, and I spent 12 years teaching full-time in a range of schools. And then a few years ago, I decided to combine those two careers and help schools with their marketing.
Amazing. So you've been in education for quite a while now, Simon. So how have you seen the education landscape change during that time?
I think the absolute big change in the past 10 years is, first of all, as you say, is funding, and the fact that schools have to go out now and raise money themselves. They have to be full. There isn't any slack that there perhaps was in the past for that. And the other thing, of course, is the fragmentation of the school market. So I think someone's pointing out that there are about like 100 different types of school in England. If you think about free schools and schools that are various faith backgrounds and so on, and so they're all very different, and they all have different offers, and that's really good for parents and people who want to choose schools. But at the same time, it's a challenge for the school to get across what makes them different. Yeah,
absolutely. So what would you say is the most positive change that you've seen in education?
I think the positive bit is that schools are going out and engaging with the community, and they, there's so many cases where schools have taken the great things they're doing and are sharing them with the community. I wrote something for Education Executive magazine this month, looking at how newsletters are just changing, and a fantastic school in the Midlands that is coming up with video and audio and getting messages across in a way that wasn't possible 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's lots of really positive things that are happening in schools in the communication and marketing area.
Which is great, but always on the flip side, there's negatives as well. So what would you say would be the most negative things you've seen change in education?
I think one of the things is schools getting very, very internally focused and not listening. And my big message is really just do listen, because whatever problems you have with parents or other stakeholders, if you get together and talk about it, they pretty much go away. I mean, we know that as teachers, if you can get a parent into a room and have a chat about their child, or you can talk to them at home, you can solve those problems. And schools need to use techniques, whether it's focus groups or surveys or getting people in just for one-to-one chats, in order to really understand what those issues are. So, if they come up with something like a new uniform policy, which is in the news at the minute, make sure you talk about it with people. If you're worried about a child's attitude to gender, again in the paper, you can talk it through. Schools are brilliant at doing that. But often, sometimes it's people get a little bit too focused on this is my way and this is what we do, and that can lead to problems. And it also feeds through into recruitment, that if you have a particular style and a particular way of teaching, you are putting off some people from applying to you.
That's right. And I think it's quite ironic there that you were saying that schools need to listen, when isn't that what they're telling our children to do all the time when they're in school, is you need to be listening in order to be able to be educated.
Yeah, and I think it's so difficult. I mean, I've been a teacher. I understand what the pressures are, and you've got to get through the day, and you've got to do those, and the pressures of Ofsted and league tables and things are really, really bad.
Yeah.
But the other thing, of course, is listening to the wider world, and that's where, within recruitment, there are so many things that other employers are doing that schools can learn from.
Yeah.
It's just difficult to somehow find the time to do that.
Yeah, and I think we've touched on it there. We've mentioned the R word, the recruitment side of it. And it's no secret that there is a teacher recruitment and retention crisis out there right now. What do you feel... What's led to this teacher recruitment crisis?
Sure.
Do you think?
I mean, the first thing is it's very external factors, and a bit like when schools talk about recruitment, it's often not things that they've done themselves. It's demographics, it's birth rates, and so on.
Yeah.
And so one of the biggest issues around teaching is the fact that the unemployment rate is so low. Post-COVID, it's lower than it has been for many years, so people have more choices.
Yeah.
So fewer of them will decide to go into teaching. Having said that, there are lots of people leaving the teaching profession, and the number last year was 7,800 teachers left, which is the biggest number I think that has ever been on record. And these weren't people retiring; they were people leaving mid-career. So it's really important that schools, think about, understand that this is happening, and look intently at what they're doing and say, is there anything we are doing that is making people leave? And then they can address recruitment as well. Okay,
so you feel it can be resolved. Can we delve a little bit deeper into what would you say are the ways to resolve this, Simon? What can they do?
I think the thing about schools, first of all, is to realise that the problem is there. The recruitment and retention crisis is not going to go away, and people sometimes think, the government will come and there'll be a magic wand and so on, and it'll be fixed. And that's not going to happen. So schools have to do it themselves. And that means making it a strategic priority, putting someone in charge, thinking about the whole HR process, the whole talent management process. How do we recruit people? How do we retain people? How do we develop people? Yeah. And that's really important as well for trusts and special schools as they move in the future, as they're going to you have to develop the next generation of leaders, and it's difficult to see where they're coming from if people are leaving after 5 or 6 years. The other thing really I think is important is not to try and solve the problem yourself. A lot of schools and a lot of conferences on this that I've been to are full of schools basically inventing things that have been happening in the outside world for many, many years that I saw, perhaps 20 years ago. And I think if schools looked outside and looked through a lens, of a normal, of a different industry, looked at teaching through that lens, they'd realise actually teaching is a really positive career. There are some brilliant things about it, and there are some really good ways to recruit people.
So maybe looking at the processes that a corporate uses with their HR processes and recruitment and retention, and maybe applying that within the school environment and transferring those policies and practices over.
Absolutely. I mean, I talk about Reed, and one of the things about Reed is I've kept in touch with people who I worked with there, and they're a recruitment company, and people would historically think that recruitment is a bit of a cutthroat business and hire and fire and get rid of people, but they really celebrate people staying 10 years, staying 20 years, staying 25 years with the business, and they make a real thing of it.
Yeah.
And they offer things to people after that time. You get a sabbatical, an 8-week sabbatical after 10 years. And when I've talked to people in schools about this, they say things like, well, it's unaffordable, or if people take 8 weeks off, then they'll never come back.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, if that's the job that you've got, if you can retain somebody, that'd be a really good idea. And other countries like Israel and Singapore do that.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of looking outside and saying we could try that. It might not be the ideal solution for everybody, but it's one example of something that could be done.
And I think we need to try anything because the crisis is worsening, unfortunately.
It's true, and I think that the short-termism that goes behind it, people want short-term solutions in education. And a lot of that is to do with the external pressures. We've said, you need to get through the next Ofsted, you need to get a good position in the next league table. But it didn't used to be like that in education. And I think that's got to be a solution. Schools have to be brave enough, and trusts have to be brave enough to say, I'm going to recruit somebody, I want them to stay here for 10 years. I want them to develop as a really good teacher and maybe as a head of department, or maybe a Senko or something like that, and give them that opportunity, because there are lots of jobs available in teaching, and you can move within teaching into special needs education, for example, and that would be a great career development opportunity for people. You don't have to just be a classroom teacher for a few years and then either get out or move up, which seems to be the problem in some places.
And I think it's a career for life, and it can be a career for life. But I do worry, Simon, that there's a lot of news articles out there talking about the fluff. For example, I think there was something this week in the news about slashing the teachers' working week by about 5 hours. How would they do that when there's not enough teachers to go around anyway?
I think that's true. I do think, again, that is perfectly feasible, but that, again, is a sort of cultural attitude and a mindset change that's needed within schools. And I think that particular group has been criticised by various people for mainly employing people who are senior teachers, mat leaders, and so on. And actually, rather their take on this will very much be, how do we get what we want while reducing the amount of time teachers spend working? Yeah. And actually, if you looked at it from a teacher perspective and said, what do teachers really need to do? You could get rid of a lot of things. I mean, as someone who has taught until very recently, I could come up with a big suggestion of things that we don't really need to do, but are still asked for within schools. But it is that case of creating a culture where teachers are free to do what they want, and we're not so worried about what if things go wrong this year, what if that particular class doesn't get perfect results this year, what if that goes back again to Ofsted and so on. Yeah,
it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think in the article I read, the solution was, we will recruit more support staff. Yeah. And I'm sitting there head in hands thinking, well, how are you going to do that? Because there's not enough of those either at the moment. So something's got to change.
And the argument with support staff, in a sense, people talk about teacher recruitment crisis, but it's also, huge, important in the support staff. There are many jobs around that pay more than people would get for teaching assistant roles and special education need assistant roles and things like that. And people can get those jobs. But again, there's things you can do. It's so sometimes it's very, very easy to get a job in a local supermarket. It's very easy to get a job working for someone like Amazon, and it pays as much and is as flexible. So schools need to realise that they're competing for those particular people. They need to look at their processes, make it easy to apply. I mean, I know a school that was had a teacher assistant job a few weeks ago, and there was a 16-page recruitment form because they just adapted the teacher page for that. Someone isn't going to fill one of those in if they can go online and do things differently. So that's really important.
So we've talked quite a lot here about there is obviously a problem, and it's all well and good there being a problem, but what's the solution? We've talked a little bit about what you would suggest, but we're professionals in this sector, Simon, as are thousands of other people that aren't necessarily teachers, but people that work to support the education sector. What more can we do?
Sure. I think one of the things, back in 2005, I did some research on this with companies, and we came up with 4 different areas, and one of them is culture, which we've talked about, and really creating a positive culture of we want people to stay and so on. But there were 3 other areas, and one of them was policies and practice. And when people think about that with schools, they always think about pay, and pay is a real problem with all the things we've talked about.
Yeah.
But people are sort of forgetting all the other things that come with schools. You know, the pension is actually really good. The holidays are really good. Teaching is flexible. People think that teaching isn't flexible because you can't work from home, but you can do part-time work. You can move around the country and work in different schools, and trusts can move people around. There are lots of ways in which you can make teaching attractive by bringing in things like cycle to work schemes or electric car schemes and things like that you can do. So you can make teaching really quite attractive.
Yes.
The problem is that people, if you have this short-term view that we only want to attract people for the next year or two, when we want them to be brilliant, we want them to arrive and be perfect and outstanding and all of those phrases that you see in job adverts, you're not then going to think about, you know, what might people want in 5 years' time.
Yeah.
You know, teaching has great maternity leave, great paternity leave, real things that people would really like to see if they move through their career.
Yeah, sure.
I remember my mother, who was a teacher, having 6 weeks paternity leave. I mean, I don't remember it because I wasn't there, but you know, I was just there. But that was the rule in 20, 30 years ago. Now you get good benefits. So sell those things, make it a career, and that's important. The other thing is values, and teaching is absolutely full of values. I mean, you know, you go into any school and you see fantastic things happening. You see people making a difference with every lesson, as the advert goes. You go into a special school and it's like tripled or quadrupled the input that people are having on children who really, really need that. And we don't celebrate that enough in schools. When I was a head of department, I actually put on the end of every department meeting good news and said at the end of the meeting we're going to talk about what's gone really well. We're going to celebrate the successes that are happening in schools, and schools need to do that more. They need to realise that it's not about the grind and getting through the next day. We are doing great things. And I think the final thing is the reputation of the school, and the reputation of the profession, and schools really need to look at that more strongly. I think if you look at the media, there are lots of negative stories about teaching. Also, if you look at recruitment websites and review sites like Glassdoor and things, a lot of schools get very negative reviews on there, and that's something you need to be really, really aware of. You know, people are not going to come and work for you if they can read about things that have gone wrong in schools. Yes. So it is so important that you are managing that reputation. You're taking that very seriously.
So nurturing the staff that you have, nurturing those relationships, and valuing those people.
Absolutely. And you know, to that point, if you look on, if you just search for your school, you know, and you look at the Google review that comes up, there are plenty of schools that have 2 out of 5 or 1 out of 5.
Yeah.
You know, that's the first thing that someone's going to see when they type it in. And if that relates to, you know, employment and people say, you know, I don't like this school, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
You need to fix that. You need to go out and find people to give you good reviews. You need to change your practice, because your reputation as a school is really, really important. And you may be doing things you think are really important in the short term, but actually that is what people are saying about you.
So this leads us quite nicely, Simon, into education marketing and looking at that a little bit more specifically. What would you say are the emerging trends in education marketing? What's working? What isn't?
Sure. I think the biggest trend I've seen over the last couple of years is the use of video, and I've just made the point that we're actually doing that now, aren't we? We're talking on video. People are consuming video more. They're watching YouTube and TikTok and so on. And it's also a great way of getting messages across in different languages. You know, you look at YouTube now that will automatically subtitle and even translate stories and things. And I think schools do that a lot more themselves, and also getting their own students involved in the process. There are huge numbers of jobs around in video and audio, management and content creation, and it's really important that schools are giving that opportunity to their students. And schools that I know, like Burnage Academy for Boys, just down the road here, you know, are really jumping on that and making a really good success of doing that. And it's also making the process more democratic, more democratic, in that the students are having input into what the stories that the school is telling about. I had a really interesting session with them where we were talking about future stories they want to talk about, and they suggested an idea, and the teacher said, "You're not supposed to know about that yet." And it's like, you know, but actually the children do know lots about things in schools, and these are things they're passionate about. And I think that is a really good step forward for schools to get involved with. And I think, you know, that's also an opportunity to engage stakeholders and get them talking about things. You know, get parents talking about what schools mean to them.
Yeah.
When I do research with parents and ask them, what do they want to see from schools, they always say this: they want to see their children more, they want to see their children's work, they want to see how they're getting on, they want to see some positive feedback, and schools that do that will succeed.
Yeah, I think so. I must admit, it drives me mad when my children are trying to record videos constantly and they don't really consider the background of what they're doing. So I could be cooking in the background and they're trying to record something, and then that's up on social media. And obviously there's lots of things, lots of restrictions that need to be put in place, and a lot needs to be considered when people are putting social media things out there. But I think it's a real opportunity for schools to be able to portray their voice and their message through a new medium. And it's not so new, but it's just something that's coming to the fore, and I think that's great.
And I think the other thing is the idea of planning in advance. I think a lot of school communication in the past has been very immediate. I've been in so many schools on Fridays when they are trying to put a newsletter together and they haven't got the right information, and it's all very stressful, and the office is very stressed. But if you're thinking about long-term communication, you don't have to be doing it on that Friday. You could be recording an interview a week or two beforehand, spending some time looking at it, checking that the audio levels are right and that the background's right, and you can reshoot it if you need to. And at the same time, the children are learning about making really, really high quality videos, and if they want to go on and be and put their own videos on TikTok, then they'll do that. They'll be better videos, and they'll also know about safeguarding, and they'll know about these issues that they shouldn't be doing when they reach the age, of course, that they're
That's
allowed
it.
to.
It's the safeguarding side of it, isn't it? That's the key thing that we need to ensure that we're enforcing. You're very active on social media, Simon, and in rambles that we have when we speak about the terminology that schools are using in their communications, be it video, their marketing materials, be it print, whatever that is, and also about the placement of adverts, and also their recruitment process. So what are they doing wrong with these messages? Looking at the trends that we've had in the education marketing.
Sure. I mean, in terms of recruitment, the problem is that schools seem. A few years ago, someone obviously wrote an advert that came out there and impressed everybody, talking about the need for outstanding, passionate, talented, well-qualified teachers. The problem is that that's been copied by everybody. So all the adverts are identikit, and they're not personal. They don't really say what matters about the school. Yeah. And when we're in a teacher recruitment crisis like we are, the most important thing is finding someone who fits with your school. Yeah. Whether that's a secondary school or a special school or whatever. You need someone who follows your values. And if all you're asking for is somebody who has essentially perfect qualifications, and so anyone who has any doubts is going to be put off a bit, and people are going to think, well, maybe I'm not good enough for this job, maybe I'm not good enough for this industry, which is a common thing in teaching, because people are perfectionists and so on. But what you really want to say is, this is us. There've been some really good examples of adverts where people are really honest and they talk about the challenges and the warts and all situation that schools are in. Maybe they go a bit too far, because actually it's not that bad, and they need to talk a little bit more about positive things. Yes. But I last week there was an advert for a school that I was reading that just said we want passionate people, and actually it's a beautiful school in a beautiful part of the world, and they didn't make anything of the fact that maybe you want to move out of a big city and move to the countryside and bring up a family in a lovely area. Yeah. Thinking a bit deeper about that. Yes. I think is really, really important.
And we say this to our clients all the time, because there are so many jobs out there and so many adverts that say the same thing, and it's quite dull and they can be quite boring, and I think it's competitive. They need to make themselves stand out a lot more. So we talk about this word passionate quite a lot, Simon, don't we? Because I think it's a word that's now been overused and is starting to have a completely different meaning from what it actually probably does mean. But it does, we do see a lot of passionate people required in the teaching sector.
And it's one of those things where, people can be quietly passionate about things, can't they? You always think about teachers. You've had quiet teachers. There's nothing wrong with being a quiet teacher. That you can sit there and get the subject across and understand it. Yeah. And I think actually, if you wanted to really do that, you would actually link the things we've talked about. Why not do some video interviews with current teachers who talk about what they're doing? Why not film some lessons and show what the lessons are actually like in the school? Because some people will not like what you're doing in the school. Some people will love it, and those people who like what you're doing and think I could be in that job, they're the ones who will apply, and the chance of converting them to take the job is far greater if they're engaged and can see what you're doing. So use video to explain what you're doing. One of the things I always say is, people will approach these sort of adverts with the view that I think that Jeremy Paxman had about politicians, which is, are you lying to me? Why do I believe anything you're saying in this advert? How do you make it honest? Particularly if they then look you up and find out that you've got a negative, lots of negative comments on social media and lots of negative reviews. So the whole thing has to be around, we are a great school, we're going to show off, we're going to want you. And if you get 5 or 6 applicants for a job, that's brilliant, because maybe you recruit them now, maybe you hang on to them and recruit them next year. You can set up a talent bank, you can keep in touch with people.
Right.
There's no law that says you can't recruit a couple of years in advance and go back to people. Sometimes people think GDPR means you can't do that, which it doesn't. As long as you have permission, you can go back to people. So that's the thing. I'd love to see schools being passionate about themselves in that way, rather than saying we want passionate people.
Yeah, for sure. And it is funny. So the adverts we see, and we start saying to clients now, you need to flip it to say what is attractive to that candidate. Why would that candidate want to come and work for you? Because there's loads of schools out there that are recruiting. The candidates pretty much can have their pick.
Absolutely.
So why should that candidate come and work for you? So that's the message we're trying to bring home at the moment. So I thought we'd just narrow it down a little bit and be a bit more specific, Simon, there's a school in London. They've got 2 goals. They're recruiting for an SEN teacher, but at the same time, they're trying to increase their admission volumes. So how do you bring together a consistent marketing message for both of those goals?
I think the thing always is to look at the audience first of all. Who are the people who you're trying to talk to? What do they want? And research. That's the thing.
Okay.
Talk to people. What do they want about in a school? Don't come up with your own ideas and assume that that the local community will want them. And once you've got that idea, once you've got that plan, communicate it really positively and go out and do this. I work with a primary school in London, and I worked with them 5 years ago, and I've just been working with them recently. And they were astonished at how many connections they actually had with the wider world they could actually use. So they invited charities in, they talked to local community organisations, and that works with recruitment as well. Use the high trust, what I call the high trust routes as well. People buy from people. Word of mouth is something people talk about a lot, but actually word of mouth doesn't happen by itself. Word of mouth needs people who understand what your school is doing. So it's a lot about just getting some clear messages, looking at the ways of getting to people, and being relentlessly positive, relentlessly consistently positive. If that makes sense.
That's brilliant. Thanks for discussing that bit, Simon. So let's talk about now how you foster a positive and inclusive school culture in all the communications and messages that you deliver in your marketing efforts.
Yeah, so I think that's very much about being consistent. We talked about the newsletters and creating a content plan for that. Stick to 3 messages or 4 messages or however many you want to, and plan that ahead, and get those, and making sure that everyone in the school is aware that that's what you're doing, that these are the things that you are focusing on. Equally, internal communication, make sure that people are aware of any issues the school is facing. If they want to recruit people, tell everybody, because they may know somebody who would be a perfect fit for that job, and it may be a personal friend, it may be someone they've talked with, and so on. So it's just about openness and communication. Don't feel that you have to suffer these things yourself as senior leadership, or that there's only one way, for example, of recruiting, which is to put an advert in the TES, which is traditionally what people do in teaching. There are lots of different ways, or but there are loads of different ways of getting that done, and then obviously working with recruitment companies is the next stage for that. But schools can get into what we, a positive virtuous circle where you end up, with your people being your best advocates. And again, even if you're going through a recruitment agency, we said before, make a video of them, because the people are positive. Get them talking about what they like about your school, what the benefits are, and that's going to be 7 or 8 times more persuasive than reading an article that says we want outstanding, passionate people who are well qualified. So use your people, link stakeholders together. You could again, particularly I imagine special schools, where we talk about values. Talk to some of the children, talk to some of the parents. Show people what you are doing, and that people may not know what a special school actually happens day to day. Demystifying that is really, really important.
Yes.
People tend to know what a Senko does in a mainstream school because they've probably at some point taught in a mainstream school. But if you're trying to recruit for a special school, that's a little bit of a barrier sometimes for people.
Yeah, okay, and that's all really interesting stuff. Thank you, Simon. I'd like to move on now to your role as a school careers coordinator. So what do you do?
Sure. So a couple of days a week I work in a school in Manchester, and I think it ties in nicely with the idea of marketing because it's about making links with stakeholders. So a lot of the time I'm talking to former pupils, local businesses, arranging them for them to come in and give talks. And one of the things I've done recently is to set up some career forums, which are essentially where people from year 10 upwards can work together to gain work experience, to enter competitions, and generally get a real insight into different industries. I think it's so important with the way the world of work is changing, and you see this as well, I guess, with the rise of apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships. Yeah. The world is not the same as it was, where you went to college and you did BTECs or you did A-levels and then you got a job or you went to university. There's lots of different opportunities now,
which is great,
which is brilliant.
Yeah.
But people need to know about that. We had someone come in a few weeks ago, give a talk about AI, and he was talking about how recruitment in the future could be you having to give answers to an AI bot who then rates your passion and all these things for which is a bit scary in many ways. But what is it going to look like in as little as 4 to 5 years' time? How is that going to change the world of work? And young people need to be exposed to it. So one of the things the government has done recently, which is absolutely brilliant, is this focus on work experience, and the work of Lord Baker and people like that is really, really important in that area.
Yeah, and I know that there was a change in the law quite recently that a careers advisor in school is now from year 7 rather than year 8. How do you feel that's going to benefit the youngest cohort within a secondary school? Yeah,
I mean, it is important that people start developing these ideas, and particularly another thing that's really important, I think, within schools is that we talked about before, is that people capture what they've done. Because again, in the past, when you talk to people in year 13 who are applying to university, they often say, I haven't really done much. But actually, they have done lots. It's just that difficult of getting things out. So if people can get into the habit of, writing down, their achievements, writing down their career encounters, as the word is nowadays. So every time they've been to visit an employer or they've done some work experience or something like that. And again, they don't have to write it. They could make a little video, or they could record themselves talking about it. It's just something that they can come back to.
That's
so
right.
So the earlier the better.
Yeah.
And having the opportunity, because people change their mind. I mean, I wanted to be a spaceman when I was in year 7, and that didn't work out. So I don't know what you wanted to be.
I was a dentist, but was really bad at science, so it was never ever going to happen.
Yeah.
And now I actually have a fear of going to the dentist. So that wasn't going to be my career, was it? Let's face it.
So that's the thing. People change their mind.
Of course they do.
And it's what you need to come out with.
Yeah. So what trends are you seeing emerging with the 16 to 18-year-old cohort?
Sure. I mean, apprenticeships is quite interesting. A lot of employers are very, very keen on that, and I think it's getting through a little bit, particularly in areas like engineering and IT and finance. And I think people can, we had a speaker from AJ Bell, the financial service people, and they were talking about the lifestyle difference between somebody doing a regular degree and someone doing a degree apprenticeship, and how you can live in a really nice flat and things like that because you're earning money while you're doing things.
Yeah.
And I think that will help, but I think there is still an expectation, a class-based expectation, I think, of where people will go post-18 that is going to require a lot of change, and I think it's going to be a challenge for companies to get to enough people to recruit people for these apprenticeships. And of course, in education, apprenticeships are being talked about as well. In all sorts of areas, and I think maybe the support staff, that's an interesting area.
I was just going to ask you actually, Simon, in your capacity as the school careers coordinator, how can we encourage more people at that sort of school leaving age, the 18-year-olds, how can we encourage them to look at special education as a career? Because it is a career for life. So much reward, so much challenge, and so many opportunities. So what can we be doing?
I think it's again about getting through to schools, and I think that's the bit where, again, demystifying it by showing people videos. If people are interested in that sort of area, they, what do young people do nowadays? They follow you on Instagram, they follow you on TikTok. That sort of place. Are people understanding what's actually happening in a special school? It's good for some people. Other people, it might not be suitable for them. Enabling them to make that choice rather than hitting them a few years later on with, this is what we need. It's the same with social care. It's hugely in demand, a hugely valuable job that people need to do. Back to those ideas, back to the values, that you're getting, back to the benefits, that are available in that sector, and then not expecting too much of people too quickly. I think that's such a mindset that we need to change. Of we will take you in, we will train you, and that's where an apprenticeship that takes 3 or 4 years, could be really, really helpful.
So I guess the message here to the colleges and the courses that are encouraging these children or these young people to enter into the career of education is expose them to more real life scenarios. And we can do that through technology quite easily.
I think that's the thing. I mean, through COVID there were so many, the rise of webinars and things like that, and we need to remember that. We need to remember that we can go into schools virtually. We can record things. We can show people what it's actually like. Take that as a positive, and try your best to answer questions and be responsive to what people want.
This actually is bringing me quite nicely onto the final section of the interview, and it's talking about the trends and technologies, and can schools actually keep up with what's going on out there. So I guess, what would you say are the latest technological advancements that are supporting children in education?
Sure. I mean, the school I work at is a Google has Google devices for everybody.
Okay.
And that sort of idea is absolutely brilliant, because we're actually using it day to day in the classroom. So children don't need to carry planners around with them. They don't need to use for some subjects and things like that, use books. They can work collaboratively, and I think that sort of move, that sort of mindset is really, really important. I always remember talking to people a few years ago about the fact that particularly sixth formers, that they have really expensive phones that cost lots and lots of money, but they never even use the calendar function on it, or they don't use the to-do list in order to make sure that they're organised. So I think using technology in that particular way is really important. I think again, using audio and video to communicate. That's what we're doing here. There's a lot more move to podcasts in schools and things like that. Learning that sort of technology, I think, is quite important.
I think the youth of today know a lot more about this than my generation do. So I'm very comfortable that they are going to be the experts of the future.
Sure.
Can we just talk very briefly then about the future predictions and insights into the education sector, Simon? What do you think is going to happen? What does special education look like in the future?
I think, as you say, the demand for special education is going up.
Yes.
I think we're well aware of that. I think the staffing and has got to be the big priority. You can't, teaching and like social care and things like is such a personal business. You've got to have the people.
Yes.
And it's that needs to be the priority. And whether that's from the government, from leaders of trusts and so on, find the people, keep them, make them great. And I'm seeing people responding to that and looking at that side of things that's happening there. And I think being positive and celebrating. I think education as a whole has sort of got itself into a bit of a negative doom spiral. Over recent years, and sometimes that reflects in some of the policies in schools which are very restrictive and controlling. And it's like there is another way, which is to build together and to say to be positive about children and young people, and as you said yourself, this generation coming up have amazing skills, have amazing awareness. As we were talking beforehand, they are more diverse and more interested in different cultures than previous generations have been, and that's something we can really, really work on. The environmental side of things, the green company, they're the ones that will drive that forward and make some real changes. So let's be positive about teaching. Let's sell the benefits, but also, as I said, learn from the outside world and use the techniques about recruitment that other people are working on.
Some really, really interesting points, Simon, and thank you for joining me today in this Spotlight session. And I hope to see you again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.